up at the moonless sky on a cool winter's night in awe and witness the angelic starscape spanning across the horizon, we ask ourselves a question, just as our ancestors once did. It's a question that touches so deep, it reaches into our very core, influencing our thoughts and decisions in life. The question that's been asked countless times by countless humans over the epochs of time. The question is as simple as this: who are we? Followed by the inevitable secondary question: where did we come from? Hi, I'm Dominician R, Gennari, and I invite you to join me as we look into the obscured origins and fate of the human race in this first episode of Forbidden Origins. As a devoted fiction author, I set out on a path of discovery, desperately trying to understand the origins of man in order to write the greatest science fiction fantasy story I possibly could. But the more I searched for answers about who we are and where we come from, the more things just didn't add up. Who are we? And where did we come from? Well, that's at least how almost every single BBC space documentary over the last 30 years has started. I know, they're such cliched questions to ask, but these two questions are unimaginably powerful, and how we answer these questions forms the foundations of every single choice and decision we'll ever make in our lives. As an avid author and researcher, I watched nearly every mainstream space and science documentary I could get my hands on over the last 30 years. From Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, Through the Wormhole, The Planets, Space, How the Universe Works, Hubble, Roving Mars, Mission to Mir. I read books by Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawking, Marcus Schoen, Dr. Robert Zubrin. I also delved into natural history, reading the hallmark standard taught in every institution around the world. Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species. And the other prominent book of its time, H.G. Wells' A Short History of the World. Listening to the narratives of modern-day scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, Dr. Robert Zubrin, Alan Guth, along with people like Egyptologists Zahi Hawass and Salima Ikram, I felt the dots weren't connecting. It seemed like there were too many holes in their theories. It sounded like their narratives just didn't hold up. I for one know as an author, your narrative has to flow. It needs to be cohesive, or else your story and your communication would utterly fail. I don't doubt the technical abilities of these scientists, and I concurred with their presentations. Well, for a time. But that all began to change. At first, it was hard for me to accept the mainstream scientists could not see there were some serious issues with the current state of their framework. Maybe it's because I'm looking at this question from more of a creative perspective. Maybe it was just the sci-fi fantasy author in me wanting to break free, putting my imagination and world-building skills to good use. But that's not until I began to meet others who had arrived at similar conclusions. I discovered the works of John Anthony West, Graham Hancock, Dr. Robert Schoch, Eric von Däniken, Robert Bauval, and Michael Cremo. What these fringe authors and scientists had presented was a truly remarkable alternative to the close-ended mainstream science narrative. It didn't matter whether they were right or wrong. What mattered were the questions they were bringing to the table, the other points of interest they had revealed. But I wasn't going to take their word verbatim. No, that's not how proper research is done. So I did what any good author would do. I researched. I began unpacking the greatest fiction story ever told concerning the forbidden origins of man. But how would I know what's true or false? I mean, where would my stable datum come from? Well, I'm grateful to have previously learned how to qualify and filter evidence from 2 retired FBI agents. And I learned how to evaluate my discoveries with discernment. In order to move forward with my investigations, I needed to venture backwards into our past. So I started with the greatest perceived opposition of science, religion. But before we open up that can of worms, let's start from the beginning to give you a rundown on what we know so far, according to modern day science.